He was an unassuming player in both stature and demeanor, but when he was on the field, he could beat defenses on the ground and through the air. He was a terror to bring down in the open field with his shifty running, but also wasn't afraid of the contact. And if the run wasn't working, he was one of the best receiving backs of his era. And when he got in the end zone, he was throwing up the X, decades before Dez Bryant, to represent his neighborhood of Bailey's Crossroads. Charlie Garner was the best of an incredibly deep backfield at Tennessee before spending years as a backup in Philly. And even though there was a lot of drama during his time with the Eagles, he pushed through and never complained. He got his chance as a lead back in San Francisco and excelled as one of the top all-purpose players in the league. And even though his rushing role was reduced during his time with some great Raiders teams, he made up for it with some of the best receiving seasons from a running back of all time. He struggled with injuries throughout his career and would see his career end abruptly because of an injury, but he never let his injuries be an excuse. His prime years were short, but during that time, he was one of the most versatile players in the league and an integral piece to the Raiders' Super Bowl run in 2002. And although his name is seldom mentioned anymore, his career deserves more recognition. So that's why today's episode is focusing on Charlie Garner. Let's jog your memory. A Virginia native, Charlie Garner attended J.E.B. Stewart High School, where as a senior he was named First Team All-Metropolitan, as well as First Team All-State, and even named Virginia's Player of the Year, as he rushed for over 2,000 yards and scored 38 touchdowns. After high school, Garner would attend Scottsdale Community College, where he dominated for the Fighting Artichokes. Garner reportedly had verbally committed to Georgia due to being a big fan of Herschel Walker, before attending JUCO due to academic issues. Although Scottsdale didn't have a lot of team success, Garner put up some insane stats in his 91 sophomore season, when he rushed for over 2,000 yards in 9 games, including a 2-game stretch where he went for 765 yards and amassed 430 rushing yards in one of those games. And although Garner would say that he had a great recruiting visit at Georgia, when he visited Tennessee, he said it felt like home. So he joined one of the most talented backfields in Vols program history, as along with himself, the Vols featured future pro James Littleman Stewart, Aaron Hayden, and Jay Graham, while also featuring Heath Shuler at quarterback, as Tennessee would have the 16th ranked offense in the nation and finish the year ranked number 12. And even though it was a committee in Tennessee, Garner would still serve as the lead back for a 9-3 Vols team. Tennessee began the season under head coach Johnny Majors, but he would require emergency heart surgery and was replaced by assistant Philip Fulmer, who would lead the team to 3 straight wins to start the year. Majors would return, and the Vols would go 5-3 the rest of the way, before announcing that he would not coach their bowl game, leaving Fulmer to head the team, and he would lead them to a 38-23 victory over Boston College in the Hall of Fame Bowl. And Garner's incredible talent would even leave his teammates in awe, as Shuler would say that he would get negative practice grades due to turning into a spectator whenever Garner had the ball. Garner would lead the team in attempts and rushing yards in his first season with Tennessee, while also averaging a team-high 6 yards per carry. Although Garner's career would be defined by his dual-threat ability, he wouldn't get a chance to show that too much in his first season in Knoxville, and for his junior season, he would rush for 928 yards and 2 touchdowns, while hauling in 5 passes for 25 yards. Tennessee bought out the remainder of Majors' contract, leaving Fulmer to coach the team in '93. Even with the same backfield committee, Garner would remain the lead back and improve significantly, as although he had just 5 more rushing attempts than the previous year, he put up over 200 more rushing yards, along with 8 touchdowns. And his 1,161 rushing yards were good for 13th in the nation, as he and Stewart would combine for over 1,700 yards and 17 touchdowns. And Garner's numbers probably could have been much higher, but as he recalled, there would be a lot of home games where he barely played in the second half, because Tennessee was already up by so much. The Vols had one of the most lethal offenses, as they averaged over 40 points per game to finish second in the nation, and would also feature a top 10 defense. Their only regular season loss came in Week 3 to number 9 ranked Florida, and they would also finish Week 7 with the tie versus number 2 ranked Alabama, and their 9-1-1 record earned them a spot in the Citrus Bowl versus Penn State. Unfortunately, Garner's final college game would end in a 31-13 loss, but for his senior season, he rushed for 1,161 yards, averaging 7.3 yards per carry and scoring 8 touchdowns, while also securing 8 receptions for 81 yards. Garner was expected to be a first-round pick, but a failed combine drug test for marijuana would hurt his draft stock, as he would fall to the second round of the '94 NFL Draft, where he would be selected by the Philadelphia Eagles with the 42nd pick. Additionally, Garner's size may have also affected his draft stock, as he was listed at just 5'9" and 189 pounds. The Eagles were a team in transition, a few years removed from their Jerome Brown and Reggie White era, and featuring QB Randall Cunningham, who hadn't been the same player since his 1991 torn ACL, as well as featuring Garner's idol in a 32-year-old Herschel Walker, head manning the backfield. And the Eagles were coached by the infamous Rich Gannon. Garner would be listed as a fullback during his rookie year, which got off to a late start, as he missed the first 3 games of the season with a rib injury. But when he got his first action in Week 4 versus San Francisco, he showed that he should have been a first-round pick. Garner would be the starter and would rush for 111 yards and 2 touchdowns on just 16 attempts, before being forced out of the game in the second half after re-aggravating his rib injury. He would return as the starter the following week versus Washington, where he would rush for 122 yards on 28 attempts, before again being forced out in the second half due to his rib. Garner wouldn't be 100% all year, and wouldn't crack 60 yards in any of the other 8 games he played, before ending the year on IR due to knee surgery. The Eagles were sitting at a surprising 7-2 midway through the year, but would then have an epic collapse, as they didn't win another game the rest of the way to finish 7-9, as Cunningham was eventually benched for backup Bubby Brister. But Garner would finish his rookie season with about 400 yards rushing and 3 touchdowns, along with 8 catches for 74 yards. Kotite was fired after the year and replaced with longtime 49ers assistant Ray Rhodes, who brought in a young up-and-comer in Jon Gruden. But the Eagles also made a huge splash in the offseason in bringing in former 49ers running back Ricky Watters, who was fresh off of a 3-touchdown performance in the Super Bowl. And Garner would unfortunately deal with more marijuana rumors over the offseason as well, but he didn't let this affect his preseason play, as just 8 months after knee surgery, he rushed for 251 yards to lead the preseason. Watters would be the lead back, but he would not make a good first impression, as he avoided contact and threw a, quote, telephone tantrum on the bench. Garner would come into the game in the third quarter and rip off 2 20-yard runs, and then when Watters came back in, he would fumble to end a scoring drive, leaving Coach Rhodes to say after the game that they need to get Garner more involved. Cunningham began the season as a starter, but Gruden's West Coast offense was not suited for him, and he would eventually be replaced by Rodney Peete in Week 4. The Eagles didn't have much of a passing offense, so both Watters and Garner would get a lot of touches. And although Watters would end up having a great year, Garner was able to improve on his rookie season as well, and would have his best performance in Week 6 versus Washington, when he had 120 yards on 9 carries and 3 touchdowns. And the Eagles improved too, as they finished 10-6, and would even put up 58 points on the Lions in a wild-card win, in which Garner led the team with 78 rushing yards and a touchdown, before they lost to Dallas in the divisional round, where Garner would only have 5 carries for 13 yards. And for the regular season, he would rush for 588 yards on a career-high and league-leading 5.4 yards per carry, with 6 touchdowns, and secure 10 receptions for 61 yards. The Eagles had a new look and a new receiving weapon going into the 96 season, as they had signed Pro Bowl receiver Irving Fryer, and would roll out their Thunder and Lightning duo of Watters and Garner for the 2nd straight year. Additionally, they had selected a safety in the 96 draft, who would become one of the greatest players of all time, and would join the Eagles' young cornerback tandem of second-year Bobby Taylor and the newly signed Troy Vincent. Watters had a career high in rushing yards and attempts this year, which would cut into Garner's opportunities, as he had received just 66 attempts this season, after receiving over 100 in each of his first 2 seasons. But he would still be effective, averaging over 5 yards per carry. However, he would finish with a career low in rushing yards in seasons where he played more than 3 games, and he would find the end zone only once, as he would rush for over 50 yards just twice this season. The Eagles again finished 10-6 to earn their 2nd straight playoff berth, but would be defeated in the wild card by San Francisco, as Garner received just 3 carries for 10 yards. And for the regular season, Garner rushed for 346 yards and 1 touchdown, while hauling in 14 passes for 92 yards. 97 was much of the same for the Eagles from a rushing perspective. Watters would put up another 1,000-yard season, and Garner would receive a career high in carries and receptions up to that point, as this would be the first season of his career where he would record over 100 receiving yards. He would play all 16 games for the first time in his career, but would only have a single 100-yard rushing game, when he put up 115 yards and 2 touchdowns against Washington on the final game of the season. The Eagles' defense ranked 24th in the league, and as good of an offensive coordinator as Gruden was, he could only do so much with a revolving door quarterback room of Rodney Peete, Ty Detmer, and Bobby Hoying, as the Eagles finished 6-9-1. And Waters was also unhappy about his lack of touches, and his girlfriend must have been unhappy too, as she reportedly approached Gruden in the tunnel after a loss and demanded he give Waters more touches. And for the regular season, Garner rushed for 547 yards and 3 touchdowns, while pulling in 24 receptions for 225 yards. Waters left for Seattle in the offseason, and Gruden had left to become head coach of the Raiders. The Eagles had given Garner a contract extension, and it looked like he finally would get a chance to be the lead back in Philly. But instead, second-year back Deuce Staley would open the year as the starter, with Garner inactive for Week 1, and the Eagles would stick with him as the starter for the remainder of the year, as Garner received just 27 carries in his first 4 games of the season. He would be the starter from Weeks 6 to 8, but after putting up a combined 73 yards on 33 carries, he was relegated to backup for the remainder of the year, which would be cut short, as he missed the final 5 weeks of the season with another rib injury. The Eagles had almost the same QB situation, but Ty Detmer was replaced by his brother Coy, and in turn had the worst offense in the league, barely averaging 10 points per game, as they would finish with a 3-13 record. And Garner's season would see him play 10 games and rush for 381 yards and 4 touchdowns, along with 19 catches for 110 yards. So now Garner was 27 years old and known more as a backup who struggled to stay healthy. And once the Eagles hired Andy Reid as their new coach, he decided to go in another direction and released Garner during the offseason. The 49ers had just gotten a great season out of running back Garrison Hearst, but he would experience a horrific leg injury during the '98 wildcard game that would keep him out for the next 2 seasons, so they were now in need of a replacement. Although it was unfortunate circumstances, Garner was the replacement that San Francisco decided to go with. But the Niners didn't seem to be too confident in Garner, as they had also signed unlikely insurance in troubled running back Lawrence Phillips. Garner was finally given a chance as a lead back, and he ran with it. He joined an offense led by a 38-year-old Steve Young and 37-year-old Jerry Rice, while also including a 4th-year receiver on the cusp of superstardom in Terrell Owens. The Niners started the year 1-1, but then in Week 3, Steve Young was knocked out of the game with a concussion, which would turn out to be the last game of his career. So 29-year-old rookie Jeff Garcia would take over as the starter for the remainder of the season. Garner would start 15 of 16 games and record 3 games with over 100 yards rushing. And ironically, the one game he didn't start would be his best game of the year, where he went for 166 yards on 20 carries. The Niners had a below-average offense, but their defense was the bigger weakness, as they allowed over 28 points to finish second last in the league. Garner would have a breakout year that saw him record a career high in rushing yards and over 500 receiving yards. He would finish 8th in the league in rushing and 1 spot ahead of Waters, and his 1,764 yards from scrimmage would be 3rd in the league, behind only Marshall Faulk and Edgerrin James. And when asked how he adjusted to coach Steve Mariucci's West Coast offense so quickly, he would give the credit to his time in Philly under Jon Gruden. But the Niners' overall season was disappointing, as they finished 4-12. And for the regular season, Garner rushed for 1,229 yards and 4 touchdowns on over 5 yards per carry, while securing 56 catches for 535 yards and 2 more touchdowns, and also recording 4 fumbles. 2000 wasn't much better for San Francisco, as they started the year 2-8 and would finish 6-10 to miss the playoffs again. Their offense had some bright spots, such as Jeff Garcia passing for over 4,200 yards and 31 touchdowns, and Owens recording over 1,450 receiving yards to be named first-team All-Pro, as Rice had now put up back-to-back seasons with less than 900 receiving yards. Garner would again be a bright spot as he rushed for over 1,100 yards and a career-high 7 touchdowns, while also hauling in nearly 70 receptions for nearly 650 yards, as his 1,789 yards from scrimmage would be 6th in the league. He would record 3 games with over 100 yards rushing, including a career-high 201 yards and a touchdown on 36 carries in a Week 4 win versus Dallas. And although the Niners had the 6th best offense in the league, it was again their bottom 5 defense which held them back. But Garner's great season would earn him his first and only Pro Bowl selection, as he finished the year with 1,142 yards and 7 touchdowns on the ground, as well as 68 catches for 647 yards and 3 more touchdowns, while losing 4 fumbles. Garner was a free agent after the season, and the Niners decided to return to a healthy Garrison Hearst, GM Bill Walsh would state that Garner had suffered a lot of wear and tear near the end of the year, which Garner was hurt by, as he felt the Niners were trying to devalue him, and it didn't help Garner's case that he never had more than 14 carries in any of the final 4 games of the year. But Garner saw a perfect opportunity and signed with Oakland to reunite with his former offensive coordinator in Philly, and he would be joined by another teammate, as Jerry Rice had been released by the Niners and would also sign with Oakland. Up to this point in his career, Garner may not have ever been utilized optimally, as he was originally used as more of a power back by Kotite, and then was stuck behind a back that needed volume to get going in Waters. He finally showed his dual threat ability in San Fran, but was also used as more of a workhorse, which may not have been ideal for a back of his size. So in Oakland, Gruden figured out the perfect mix by using him as the lead back, but leaving the short yardage situations to bruiser Tyrone Wheatley and fullback Zach Crockett. Garner would now become one of the top dual threat backs in the league for a short period. In 2001, under Gruden, he would rush for over 800 yards while also pulling in over 70 receptions to contribute to a top 5 Raiders offense, led by Rich Gannon and the veteran receiving duo of Jerry Rice and Tim Brown. However, after an 8-2 start, the Raiders went 2-4 the rest of the way, as they finished 10-6, which was only enough for a wildcard berth. Although Garner didn't have a single game with over 100 yards rushing all year, he exploded for 158 yards and 1 touchdown on 15 carries in a wildcard win versus the Jets, which included a late-game 60-yard touchdown run to secure the win. The divisional round brought the New England Patriots, who were led by a second-year QB that had taken over for starter Drew Bledsoe after a season-ending injury early in the year. Garner would only manage 64 yards on 17 carries in this game, and along with his receiving would finish with 96 yards from scrimmage. But this game would end in heartbreak for Raiders fans, as this was the infamous tuck rule game, where an apparent Brady fumble would be ruled an incompletion, allowing New England to continue their drive and kick a game-tying field goal, and then eventually a game winner in overtime. But Garner's regular season ended with him rushing for 839 yards and a touchdown, while catching 72 passes for 578 yards and 2 more touchdowns. A trade had been completed shortly after their playoff loss, but not for players. Instead, the Raiders had traded Jon Gruden to the Bucs for a pair of first-round picks. Luckily for Garner, the Raiders' new head coach would be assistant Bill Callahan, who had been the O-line coach in Philly during Garner's time there, so he still knew how to use Garner. The Raiders rolled out virtually the same offense and were propelled by an MVP season from Rich Gannon. Rice and Brown combined for over 2,000 receiving yards, and the Raiders also got a boost from third-year receiver Jerry Porter. But it was Garner who stole the show in the backfield, as he rushed for over 960 yards, but also had over 940 yards receiving, and his 91 receptions ranked first among running backs and 10th in the league. Additionally, his 1,903 yards from scrimmage would rank 5th in the league. He would record 3 games with at least 100 rushing yards and 5 games with at least 80 receiving yards. Oakland would have the 2nd-ranked offense and 6th-ranked defense on their way to an 11-5 record, which won them the division. Garner would have 93 rushing yards and 26 receiving yards in the Raiders' divisional round win versus the Jets, then 36 rushing yards, 55 receiving yards, and a touchdown in the AFC Championship versus Tennessee. The Raiders would then face the Buccaneers in the Super Bowl, led by Jon Gruden, and one of the most dominant defenses of all time. And the Bucs' defense would dominate, as they blew out Oakland 48-21 and had 3 defensive touchdowns. And Garner was held to just 10 yards on 7 attempts, but did add 51 yards on 7 receptions. And for the regular season, he rushed for 962 yards and 7 touchdowns, while adding 91 receptions for 941 yards and 4 more touchdowns, all while committing 0 fumbles. 2003 saw a steep decline for Garner and the Raiders. Gannon suffered a midseason shoulder injury and would appear in just 7 games, and without him, Rice and Brown's numbers would see a significant drop. Although Garner started more games than Wheatley, he was outgained on the ground by over 100 yards, and his receiving numbers would suffer as well, as he had less than 50 receptions for the first time since his Eagles days. The Raiders as a whole had a disaster of a year, as they could never string together multiple wins, while recording a 5-game and 3-game losing streak, en route to a 4-12 record. Garner and cornerback Charles Woodson would also miss the final game of the year after being suspended for missing curfew. And for the regular season, Garner would rush for 553 yards and 3 touchdowns, while hauling in 48 receptions for 386 yards and 1 more touchdown. Garner would follow Gruden again and sign with the Bucs for the 2004 season, but after just 3 games, he tore his patellar tendon and missed the rest of the year for a 5-11 Bucs team, and his shortened season saw him rush for 111 yards and catch 9 balls for 62 yards. Garner was then released right before the 05 season and would never play another down in the NFL. Charlie Garner's time near the top was extremely short-lived, but you can't help but wonder if his career would have been different had he been in better situations with coaches who knew how to use him. He got a bad rap early in his career for a couple of marijuana offenses and was seen as an injury-prone back, but he just wasn't the type of running back made to handle the workhorse load. And once his receiving ability was maximized in San Fran, he had one of the best 4-year stretches of any running back in the NFL during that time. But he still did struggle with injuries that would end his career prematurely. And even though his career was over at 30 years old, that's pretty impressive for a running back, especially one of his size. And if you instead look at his career as an 11-year pro, that's special. He was a player that never put himself in the spotlight and shied away from any type of publicity off the field, even though he was reportedly a big-time trash talker come Sunday. But his unique skill set always put him in a position to help any team he played on. And because of his unselfish attitude, he was a player that coaches were always happy to have. He'll never be talked about as an all-time great, but for a brief period in the late 90s and early 2000s, Charlie Garner really lived up to his instant offense nickname, as he was one of the most productive players the league had to offer. But that's it for today's episode on Charlie Garner. Hope you enjoyed it, and make sure to subscribe for more NFL content. If you like this one, check out this one on another forgotten back. Or maybe you like basketball, in which case here's a whole playlist for you. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.